GM, good morning. Welcome to the Milk Road Show, the daily crypto show that's like the sports center for nerds. We bring you the highlights from crypto each and every day. I'm your host, Jay Hamilton, and today we are joined by Rajat Soni, who has worked in finance for over 10 years and has gone full on crypto. He is the Bitcoin guy on crypto. In today's episode, we're going to talk about Rajat's predictions for Bitcoin price in this cycle. We're going to look at supply and demand. We're going to look at some TA. We're going to see where we are now and where we think we're going. And then we're also going to talk about why Rajat believes that MicroStrategy is one of the best proxies or beta plays to investing in Bitcoin. We're going to explain MicroStrategy, their 42 billion plan to buy even more Bitcoin, and so much more. Rajat, welcome to the Milk Road Show.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, very excited to have you. Okay, let's start off with Bitcoin is so close to all-time highs, although we've had a little bit of dip this morning as we record. Where do you think we're at right now with Bitcoin price? What are you seeing when we look at the charts?
I actually think that we're going to start going up pretty quickly now. We got through. So at the top there, I see the line that you have there, the resistance, and then you have a support at the bottom. So the resistance is basically where people are selling hard, and then the support is where people are buying hard. So what they're doing is I guess a lot of people have the same picture in mind. I had the exact. You showed me this, and I had the exact same graphic on my end. So I mean, I'm sure it's widely known, but the fact that Bitcoin has gotten through the resistance at the top, it's an 8-month resistance. So what that means is people, whenever the price goes to that point, people are starting to sell. Whenever the price goes to the bottom, people are starting to buy. That's the support. So in this case, we finally broke through that resistance, meaning that there's no more Bitcoin available under that line at the top. So what happens is Bitcoin's prices breaks through and it starts going up because at this point we're in price discovery. So price discovery is essentially where people are just trying to decide what the equilibrium price of Bitcoin should be, and they're using just the markets, the free market mechanisms that we have to discover what that should be, where it should be going, and it seems like the price is starting to head up.
Yeah, you can really see that we have broken out of this wedge pattern that we've been in for, as you said, 8 months. And it's funny, when you look back to the past cycle, the same thing happened where we were in a wedge pattern. We were in a wedge pattern for a while, and then we finally broke out. And that's when we broke out from like the 20,000 and we got all the way up to the 69,000 in that one parabolic move that we made. Let's look at the Bitcoin supply. That's very interesting to look at it. And we were looking at a spreadsheet that you made. I'm going to bring this spreadsheet up on the screen in just a second here. And for those listening on the podcast, we'll make sure we explain it. But when you look at one of the most interesting aspects of Bitcoin is obviously the way that the supply is managed. We have governments that are inflating our currencies constantly by printing more supply, and Bitcoin has a capped supply. When you look at the Bitcoin supply schedule, what do you see? What stands out to you here?
So I'll explain what the schedule is first of all. So the first column A is the epoch. So that's you can almost call it Bitcoin's age. So Bitcoin ages in 4-year cycles. It has each of these epochs is 210,000 blocks. So we can see here epoch 1 was 210,000, epoch 2 was 210,000, 3, 4, 5, 6. So right now we're at around, I believe, 860,000, 870,000 or so. I actually don't know which block we're on, but somewhere along those lines. But each of these epochs represents 210,000 blocks. During each block, a certain amount of Bitcoin is produced. And over time, the amount of Bitcoin being produced is decreasing. So we can see here, in the first epoch, there were 7,200 Bitcoin produced per day. In the second epoch, there were 3,600, third epoch, 1,800. Today, there's only 450 Bitcoin being produced per day. In total, I'm sure your audience knows this, but the total maximum supply for Bitcoin is just under 21 million Bitcoin. So if we scroll all the way down, we're going to see that number being reached in around 2140. I mean, there's no guarantees. Sometimes blocks are faster if more and more hashing power is contributed to the network. Maybe this will be 2136. Maybe this will just be moved ahead by 4 years. But the point here is that eventually there's going to be just under 21 million Bitcoin. So if we go back up here, we can see here that the inflation rate for Bitcoin is decreasing. So every cycle, there's a certain amount of Bitcoin added. In the first cycle, there were 10.5 million, 5.25 million, 2.625 million. In this cycle, in the current cycle, we're going to see 656,250 Bitcoin being produced. And at this point, on April 19th, 2024, there were 94% of the supply. So 94% of the supply of Bitcoin was already produced and added to the circulating economy. So every single year we see here that the inflation rate keeps decreasing. So in the first cycle, 100% of the supply was created. So 10.5 million. That was the total supply that was available. In the second cycle, 33%. In the third cycle, 14% of the cycle of the supply was created. In the fifth cycle, 6% of the total. So what I'm saying here is 100. So in this case, 100% of the total circulating supply was created in this cycle. In the current cycle, we're only going to have 3.225% of the total circulating supply created within this 4-year period. So at the end of this 4-year period, 3.22% of the total supply will have been created. And over time, we're seeing this decrease and decrease. And what this means is because there's less and less Bitcoin being created, but demand keeps rising. What this means is that people have to convince other people to sell their Bitcoin in order for them to get exposure to it. So let's say BlackRock wants to acquire 100,000 Bitcoin. They can't just produce it out of thin air, right? They can't just create Bitcoin out of thin air and add it to their wallets, right? That's not possible. But in the current financial system, that is possible. If there's demand for fiat, then that fiat will be created out of thin air and it'll be added to the economy. So what we're seeing here is because more and more people want Bitcoin, but the supply isn't changing, the amount of Bitcoin being produced every 10 minutes isn't changing unless it's based on what the protocol wants to create. It doesn't matter what the demand is. It doesn't matter how many people want Bitcoin. It doesn't matter how much Bitcoin BlackRock, Fidelity, all these institutions want. All that matters is that the protocol rules are being satisfied, and that's the only thing that's relevant here. So over time, what we're seeing is that less and less Bitcoin are being produced every single day. Demand is increasing. So the only explanation that I can give here is that the price is going to go up, right? That's the only thing that can change.
Right. Yeah. If you have a decreasing supply, and as you said, I shouldn't say a decreasing supply, you have a supply cap, but the amount of supply becoming available within each epoch, within each 4-year period is much lower. As you said, within this 4-year period that we're in right now, we have a 3.2% inflation rate of Bitcoin. But if the demand is greater than that 3.2% inflation rate, which with the addition of the Bitcoin ETF, with the addition of more and more Bitcoin just catching on to a trend of more institutions and nation states and retail investors wanting to buy it, then the demand's higher. Well, simple supply demand mechanics at play, the price will go higher. The other thing I think that you mentioned that was interesting here is that, almost 94% of Bitcoin has already been mined. So we're actually very close to that 100% supply. However, because of the way that the supply is mined, it's still going to take another approximately 100 years before we get to 100% of the supply. Can you explain how come, one thing that I'm having trouble wrapping my head around, I don't know if you know the answer to this, is the Bitcoin ETF is doing so well right now, especially these past, the other day there was almost $1 billion in inflows in the ETF. It's up around 23, or even maybe it's hit 24 billion in net inflows already. Why is the Bitcoin price not going up more when so many of the ETFs are buying? Do you know?
The way that I see it, the way that I think of it is people have this notion in their mind that Bitcoin's price probably won't go past 69,000, 70,000. They think that the last all-time high is going to be this all-time high as well. So what they're doing is they're just getting rid of as much Bitcoin as they can. I think there's I was
Mm,
reading something where they were saying where the person was saying how during the beginning of a bull market, a lot of whales will sell. They'll get rid of their
mhm,
Bitcoin because I mean, it makes sense to me. I think a lot of people do get lucky with Bitcoin. They just buy Bitcoin. They have no idea what it is. So the reason why I want to show this is if we go to the top in 2021,
mhm,
Bitcoin's price was barely there for like an hour, 2 hours, maybe. I don't know exactly how long it was there for, but if you look at the wick at the top there in 2021, Bitcoin's price was barely at that level above 60,000 for a very long time. I think it barely
mhm,
even closed above $60,000. If we go to like the daily or weekly chart, it barely closed right
mm,
above that level. But now we're just moving sideways. Now Bitcoin's prices has settled. People are starting to believe that yes, this is the price of Bitcoin. Back then, people didn't believe that. It got to that point because of hype. It
mhm,
got to that point because people were just it was fear and it was greed, right? That's pretty much it. People had a
mhm,
fear of missing out and they had the greed of wanting to make more money. And then they took on tons of leverage. They put all of that money into Bitcoin. And of course, we saw that massive wick where Bitcoin's prices went crazy, right?
mhm,
Like I said, now if we move over back over to 2024, we see the price is actually just moving sideways in that range where in
mhm,
2021 people thought it was a gamble. Today, people are buying Bitcoin for their long-term savings at that price. So the way that I see it, just circling back, the reason why the ETFs are buying so much Bitcoin, but the price doesn't seem to be moving is because there are people who bought back then, people who are trading, they're willing to get rid of their Bitcoin, people who bought way before that, people who have thousands of Bitcoin and they don't need all of it. Maybe they want to sell some, maybe they don't quite understand what they have. They're selling it and these ETFs are able to buy it.
mm, mhm,
That's pretty much it, right? Because eventually, like I said, we're going to go into price discovery, and at that point, because there's so much Bitcoin available between those bands, between the two, the support and resistance, because there's so much Bitcoin available there. Now that Bitcoin is gone, now we can't find Bitcoin between those bands. Now Bitcoin for Bitcoin to go back to those the price to go back between those levels, there's going to have to be a ton of supply that comes into the economy, and who knows what happens. Maybe for all we know, Satoshi starts selling and we go back down.
No,
And
that's
what happens there is maybe we go below the support,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
nobody can
If
predict.
Yeah, I see what yeah, I mean, that's a comment that, Zeneca made on, yesterday's show was,
Mm,
there's 2 black swan events that could happen for Bitcoin, however unlikely they might seem, which is one is Satoshi has tremendous amounts of supply. So if all of a sudden that supply was unlocked and came onto the market, or MicroStrategy would be the other one. If MicroStrategy ever started selling Bitcoin, which it's never done, so hopefully that will continue. But those could be 2 black swan events. But outside of that, there is no more supply, not enough to satisfy the demand. And as you said, we're in a point right now where there is still sellers because there is still those who believe there's a lot of people who invested very early and who are taking profits right now and who are thinking, hey, we've been ranging for a while. I don't know if we're going to get to that 100K mark. So I'm satisfied to sell right now. But at the same time, there's also a lot of demand, as we can see as a result of the ETF and just demand across the board to buy Bitcoin. And that is what is keeping us within this range. And I think we're close to being out of supply at this price is what I feel, and I think you feel the same way. Okay, I want to talk about MicroStrategy because MicroStrategy is, as you said yourself, you invest in your investment within crypto is focused on Bitcoin and MicroStrategy, and MicroStrategy is a very interesting beta play or proxy to Bitcoin. For those people who don't really, I think everybody knows MicroStrategy. They've heard the name. They know Michael Saylor, but they might not understand really what MicroStrategy is as a business and how MicroStrategy has used Bitcoin to grow their business tremendously over the past few years. Can you break that down for us?
yeah, absolutely. So there's a graphic that I told you about, the reflexive flywheel
Yeah, let
strat.
me
Yeah,
pull
that
that
one.
up.
Yeah, yeah, perfect. So what that shows you is what MicroStrategy is doing right now. So what MicroStrategy is doing, the way that I see it, is they're combining the legacy financial markets with crypto. I mean, with I guess with Bitcoin. But what they're doing is they're kind of, I think Michael Saylor's been, he said this before, but they're creating a bridge where they're using the legacy financial markets to buy Bitcoin. They're using the fact that you can just create money out of thin air in the legacy market to buy Bitcoin, and
Hmm.
that's basically what they're doing. They have their own. So I heard somebody say this as well. They have their own Bitcoin printer, which I think is a great idea because if they keep buying more and more Bitcoin and they keep borrowing more and more Bitcoin, if they keep selling shares, and because of that, the price of their stock or the price of Bitcoin keeps going up because they can give exposure to their shareholders, to their investors, to Bitcoin. It's a flywheel. So what that means is that it's a flywheel effect. So what that means is in the beginning it's difficult to start up, but eventually it just does it on its own. It just moves on its own. So what this graphic shows you is MicroStrategy started issuing debt to buy Bitcoin. So MicroStrategy plus debt equals Bitcoin. Then we see number two, BTC increases. So the price of Bitcoin increases because MicroStrategy is buying Bitcoin from the market and it's putting it away. It's not giving it back to the market. It's just basic supply and demand. So if MicroStrategy buys Bitcoin, less supply is available for other people to buy,
Hmm.
less supply available to be sold at that current price, and the prices goes up. So what this means is when MicroStrategy buys Bitcoin, they're adding it to their balance sheet. They're putting that appreciating asset in their balance sheet, and the value of their company is based on Bitcoin. So if
Hmm.
Bitcoin's price goes up, so does MicroStrategy's price, MicroStrategy's market cap. So the number of shares times the share price increases because the price of each share keeps rising. So then number three, we see here, MicroStrategy market cap increases, weight in indices increases. I'm not sure if MicroStrategy is in any major indexes. I think they may be in the Russell 2000, which is a small cap one. I'm not
Hmm.
completely sure on that though. I might be wrong. But I think the target here is to be in the S&P 500. And what that means is if MicroStrategy accumulates enough Bitcoin and their market cap increases enough and they keep making this happen over and over again for the next decade, however long they do it for, eventually there's no way to not include them in the S&P 500, and that's where the flywheel effect starts. So when a company like MicroStrategy gets added to the S&P 500 and those shares are being passively purchased by anybody who's buying the S&P 500, it means that MicroStrategy can now buy more Bitcoin because the market cap of their company increases, because now we move to number 4. MicroStrategy issues equity. So what MicroStrategy does is, can we switch over to that tweet that I sent you? I just want to
Hmm.
explain that one there. So what we see here is right now, MicroStrategy's stock is being sold for 2.7 times the Bitcoin that they have. So this is called a net asset value premium. I think this may be a little off. I think the number may have been updated here, but essentially, people are willing to pay MicroStrategy. People are willing to pay 2.7 times the value that each share is backed by in Bitcoin terms. So if one share, let's say somebody buys one share of Bitcoin, they would buy it for 2.7 Bitcoin worth of cash. Sorry, if somebody were to buy one Bitcoin worth of shares, so shares backed by one Bitcoin essentially, they would pay 2.7 times in cash. So just to read this out, the premium for MicroStrategy shares is 2.7 times right now. I want to explain this. Every time MicroStrategy issues new shares, investors buy those shares and give MicroStrategy 2.7 times the value of what they're getting in return. So MicroStrategy receives 2.7 Bitcoin worth of cash. So they're getting US dollars, and they give out shares that they can print. They can create these shares out of thin air, and they can use the proceeds to buy Bitcoin. So they give out one Bitcoin worth of shares that are backed by one Bitcoin. MicroStrategy then turns around and goes and buys 2.7 Bitcoin. So what this is doing is it's increasing the amount of Bitcoin that each share is backed by. So now we see here, MicroStrategy shareholders receive a Bitcoin yield because over time their shares will be backed by more Bitcoin. Each share represents more Bitcoin, as long as MicroStrategy can keep doing this. Shares can be printed at will, like I said. So MicroStrategy can, as long as there's demand for shares, MicroStrategy can keep printing more and more and more, and they can keep selling them in the market. And right now, I think because of the way that MicroStrategy is doing this, because of the way that MicroStrategy is just aggregating all of this supply and it's the potential for what they can do with the supply in the future that's being valued. It's not the actual Bitcoin that's being valued. It's the potential for what they can do with that Bitcoin. So essentially, MicroStrategy wants to be a Bitcoin bank eventually, and that's what's going to change everything. So if MicroStrategy does become a Bitcoin bank, they could take over the entire. I think right now the industry is worth something like $20 trillion. The
Hmm.
the bank, actually, no, not 20 trillion. Might be smaller than that, but I don't know. I don't know what the exact numbers are. But MicroStrategy could take over a massive portion of that. And right now, MicroStrategy is only valued at what, 40 billion, $50 billion. If they
Hmm.
go to a trillion, if they go to 10 trillion, eventually that could happen because they have so much Bitcoin and they have a monopoly. They have a moat. So what Warren Buffett's well known as saying is you invest in companies that have moats, and I see that MicroStrategy has a moat. They can keep selling more and more shares. They can keep issuing more and more equity. They can keep buying more and more Bitcoin, and they can keep adding it to their balance sheet. And each share becomes backed by more and more Bitcoin over time. And that's the I think that's the magic here. So MicroStrategy is just buying more and more Bitcoin, but they're able to buy more Bitcoin than the amount of shares that they're issuing, and that's what just completely blows the entire market apart.
Hmm. Hmm. And that's why when we look at MicroStrategy's price versus the Bitcoin price, which I'll pull up here on the screen, you can see that MicroStrategy has outperformed Bitcoin over I mean, for quite a while, to be honest.
Yeah. And the reason for that is that they can keep accumulating more and more Bitcoin per share. And the investors that are buying MicroStrategy, they're expecting that MicroStrategy will continue to accumulate more and more Bitcoin. And eventually, at some point, who knows when this will be, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line, the investors are basically pricing in the value of the company if it does become a Bitcoin bank. And most people haven't figured this out yet. Most people have no idea that this is even close to happening, or because it's so hard, first of all, to understand what Bitcoin is.
Hmm.
Then it's so hard to understand what the legacy markets are doing. Then on top of that, it's so difficult to. I mean, like I said, most people are risk averse, so people aren't even looking this direction. And in this case, the people who are looking in this direction are figuring it out early, and eventually, like I said, the entire market is going to be on top of this.
So what are the risks to investing in MicroStrategy? Like, obviously, that all sounds great and sounds amazing,
Yeah.
assuming that that happens, but there's possible that it doesn't play out that way. What are the risks?
Absolutely. So, uh, I mean, the first most obvious one, it's glaringly obvious. It's the fact that MicroStrategy's Bitcoin can be confiscated, and people will tell you, "Oh no, that's never going to happen." I've made videos about this. I've gotten so many comments. "Oh no, you're stupid, man. You're just making stuff up. You're in your own fantasy world." But I mean, that could happen if the world goes to a Bitcoin standard. If the U.S. doesn't have enough Bitcoin, of course they can confiscate it. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but the possibility of that is a lot higher than if you were to hold Bitcoin in cold storage, if you were to keep it in your own wallet and you have it set up in a way that nobody can access it. Maybe you have multi-sig, it's in different locations around the world. Nobody can access your Bitcoin. They can come to your house, they can try to take your Bitcoin, they can even hurt you, but they won't be able to access your Bitcoin, right? But with MicroStrategy, it's a honeypot. It's like what happened in 1933, where people had their gold deposits at banks, and it just made it so much easier for the U.S. government to work with the Federal Reserve to confiscate all of that gold. So that's the main risk. I think another risk is, of course, that if MicroStrategies move if Bitcoin just moves sideways for the next uh, 5 years, I don't think that's going to happen. I'm not. I'm not. I don't think that's gonna. I don't think the likelihood of that is very high. But if it does happen, or if Bitcoin drops, let's say 90%, then MicroStrategy shares could drop significantly, and a lot of people will probably sell. Maybe because Bitcoin is a Veblen good, maybe a lot fewer people are interested in Bitcoin. Maybe a lot fewer people are interested in buying MicroStrategy shares, but I don't think that's likely. I think the first one is more likely than the second one.
Right. So basically, the main risk to there's the confiscation risk, there's the um, sort of a real black swan event is what that would be if that happened. Um, But the main risk that I think an investor needs to think about is it's a leveraged play on Bitcoin. So you have to really believe that Bitcoin price is going to go up, because if
Yeah,
Bitcoin price doesn't go up, the pain is much greater on the way down.
that's it.
Okay. Why do you invest in MicroStrategy versus other proxies or other beta plays to Bitcoin, such as the Bitcoin ETF or others?
So the ETFs are uh, the issue with the ETFs is that they have a fee. So the best case scenario is that I underperform against Bitcoin. So there's no reason for me, unless I have money that's locked in somewhere, I wouldn't buy the ETFs. That's first of all. And then let's say miners, for example, miners are competing with one another to create more Bitcoin. There's always going to be competition. Miners will be replaced. Miners will be disrupted. In the case of Bitcoin, there's no competition. Bitcoin, sorry, in the case of MicroStrategy, there's no competition because MicroStrategy has 1.2, 1.3% of the total supply. I don't think anybody else will be able to get to this point. I don't think that's even possible at this point, but maybe, who knows, maybe I'm wrong here, but I don't think most companies, most publicly traded companies will be able to get to this point. So the way that I see it, MicroStrategy is, like I said, creating a moat where they have this competitive advantage over pretty much every single other player in the financial industry, every single other publicly traded company. And because of this, they're able to outperform Bitcoin, right? So if I were to take the risk of buying a Bitcoin proxy, first of all, I want to earn more than what Bitcoin will pay me. So the ETFs are out. I don't personally see a benefit of holding the ETFs. I'd rather just hold Bitcoin in cold storage, right? So if I'm going to put my money in something, if I'm going to take the risk, then I want to be rewarded for it. I want a higher return than what Bitcoin will give me. So the only money that I have in MicroStrategy, just as a disclaimer here, is money that's locked in that I can't touch until I'm 55. It's a pension account. If it was this cash that I could take self custody of, I would just buy cold storage Bitcoin.
Okay. Okay. Great. I want to finish with your thoughts on Bitcoin for this cycle. What do you think is the high that Bitcoin could hit in this cycle, and what do you think is the low?
I think I have a question on that. I mean, how do we even know there's going to be cycles anymore? With MicroStrategy saying they're going to be buying $42 billion of Bitcoin, we
Hmm.
have that constant flow of money coming in. I don't think that that we're going to see an 80, 90% drop. I
Okay.
mean, I think we could easily see a staircase up, right? With based on just the chart that we saw with the price, we saw the resistance and the support. Maybe we just keep seeing that. Maybe we see resistance, support, price discovery, and then 6 months of sideways movement, price discovery. 6 months of sideways movement, price discovery, and it keeps going up like that. I mean, for all we know, that could happen, unless let's say a massive institution just blows up. But I mean, let's based on my assumption here that a cycle will be 4 years. Let's say by the end of this cycle, I think that maybe Bitcoin can be. I mean, it could go up to $1 million for all we know,
You think
right?
it could hit a
And
million in this cycle?
it
That
could.
would be
I mean,
insane.
it would be. I mean, but I don't see that as being a crazy assumption, right? Because of the fact that Bitcoin has a finite supply. I know there's a lot of other people who are saying this. Samson Mao, for example, says this. There are other people who say this, but it could go to a million, but it could also drop all the way down to 10,000. I think
Mhm.
just because if Satoshi Nakamoto comes out and sells all their Bitcoin, then the price is probably going to drop to 1,000, and then
Mhm.
it'll come back up. If Satoshi goes and sells all 1 million, 1.2 million coins, it could drop in the triple digits for all we know, right? So I mean, the way that I see it, countries are able to buy. The ETFs have opened up a whole new floodgate of cash that can come in. So for all we know, Bitcoin's price never comes down 50, 60% again.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So, and what would be your target price in this cycle? Like, what would you be happy with? I know, uh, 100K feels like a very strong possibility by the end of the year if we can have this breakout. Basically, I think if we get past the election, then
Yeah.
I think we could. And the election is a smooth election and not contested and doesn't go and drag on for weeks or months and in the courts. But assuming it's smooth, I think we could see a real, and then everybody's been saying this, and I assume you agree. But beyond this year, what would be a reasonable, like in your estimates, at what price would you be like, oh yeah, I feel like this could be the top right now?
I don't really see it that way. I see
Interesting.
Bitcoin as just a savings account. I like if I need
Mm.
extra, the way that I see it, if I need extra fiat, I'll sell some Bitcoin. If I have extra fiat, I'll buy Bitcoin. I'm not going to sell Bitcoin just to take profits. That's not my goal
Hmm.
here. I know a lot of people do that. I know that's the way to go for a lot of people. But the thing is that if you take Bitcoin, if you take profits, let's say you sell half your stack, and Bitcoin's price never comes back down to that level again, you've basically turned half your stack, half of your um, ultimate protection, ultimate freedom asset into pieces of paper.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I could, I mean, I would be surprised if it doesn't go up to 400,000. But I don't know. Again,
Wow.
these are just estimates, right? Nobody really knows.
Hmm.
Nobody has any idea how the demand is going to work out. For all we know, let's say China comes out and says we're going to sell all our treasuries and we're going to buy Bitcoin with all of it. What's Bitcoin's price going to be at that point, right? And it's just
Yep.
game theory at this point. It's just people trying to figure out what other people are going to want to do in the future, and countries trying to figure out what other governments are going to want to do in the future, and they just go based on that. So for all we know, we could be on a full Bitcoin standard globally in the next 10 years.
Hmm.
And where
Hmm.
where would Bitcoin's price be at that point?
Right. Yeah. Rajat, thank you so much for joining the show today and sharing all your thoughts with us. Been very interesting to see and hear the thoughts of somebody who sees Bitcoin in a different way than many of the people that we have on the show. And great to have such a bull in the space. Let's go. I hope we get Bitcoin a million as well. Everybody, thank you so much for listening in. Have a wicked awesome day.